Standing outside my brand new 3 bedroom house, holding those shiny keys in my trembling hands, I felt like I had finally made it. 29 years old, 5 years of grueling work, eating ramen noodles for dinner, more nights than I care to admit, all leading to this moment. My American dream was finally real. I thought my family would be proud, thought they would celebrate this milestone with me. Little did I know that this house would become the battlefield where I would learn the most painful lesson about family loyalty. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like button if you have ever felt like the family scapegoat. This story might hit close to home, so grab some tissues and settle in because this journey gets intense before it gets better. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand how deep this betrayal cut. My name is Lauren, and I have always been the responsible one in my family. While other kids were asking their parents for lunch money, I was working part-time jobs to buy my own school supplies. My father, Mark, a retired engineer, and my mother, Susan, an elementary school teacher, had 2 daughters. Me, the eldest at 29, and my sister Jessica, 26, who everyone called the golden child. Growing up, the favoritism was not even subtle. When Jessica wanted to go to an expensive private college, my parents took out loans and paid every penny. When I applied for college, they handed me financial aid forms and wished me luck. Jessica got a brand new Honda Civic for her 16th birthday. I got a used bicycle from a garage sale for mine. When Jessica made mistakes, they were learning experiences. When I made the same mistakes, they were character flaws that needed correction, but I never let it break me. Instead, I used it as fuel. After graduating from a state school with a marketing degree and $30,000 in student loans, I landed a job at a mid-sized advertising firm in downtown Chicago. The pay was decent, but decent does not buy houses in Illinois. So I did what I had always done. I worked harder. For 5 years, I lived like a monk. I worked my day job from 9 to 5, then freelanced as a social media consultant from 6 to midnight. Weekends were spent writing content for small businesses, managing Instagram accounts for local restaurants, and designing promotional materials for anyone willing to pay. My social life consisted of Netflix and the occasional coffee with coworkers who took pity on my hermit lifestyle. My apartment was a studio the size of most people's closets, furnished with secondhand everything. I ate ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever was on clearance at the grocery store. For 6 months straight, I lived on generic cereal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because it was 18 cents per serving. I drove a 15-year-old Toyota with a cracked windshield and a rattling engine that sounded like it was planning its funeral. Every extra penny went into my house fund. I had a jar on my kitchen counter where I collected loose change. I sold plasma twice a week for extra cash. I even picked up a weekend job cleaning offices downtown. My coworkers thought I was crazy working myself to death for some distant dream. My family thought I was being dramatic. But I had a vision. A real home with a yard, a place where I could finally breathe, where I could have people over without being embarrassed about the paper-thin walls and the neighbors who screamed at each other all night. I wanted a place that was mine completely and legally mine. When I finally saved enough for a down payment, I spent 3 months house hunting. I looked at dozens of places, each one either too expensive, too small, or in neighborhoods where I would need a bodyguard to check the mail. Then I found her. A beautiful 3 bedroom ranch house in a quiet suburb with a big backyard, updated kitchen, and enough space for the family dinners I had always dreamed of hosting. The day I signed the closing papers was the happiest day of my life up to that point. My hands were shaking as I wrote check after check, watching my savings account drain to nearly zero, but knowing it was worth every penny. The real estate agent handed me those keys, and I just stood there in the empty living room, crying tears of pure joy and accomplishment. The first call I made was to my parents. I was practically bouncing with excitement as I told them the news. I expected cheers, congratulations, maybe even an offer to help me move. Instead, I got a lukewarm response that felt like a bucket of ice water. My father simply said that it sounded nice, and my mother asked if I was sure I could afford the mortgage payments. When I tried to share details about the house, about how hard I had worked to get there, they cut the conversation short because they were busy helping Jessica pick out curtains for her rental apartment. The contrast was not lost on me, but I pushed down the disappointment. This was my moment, my victory, and I was not going to let their lack of enthusiasm ruin it. I decided to throw a housewarming party 6 weeks after moving in. I spent an entire weekend cleaning, decorating, and preparing food for what I hoped would be a celebration with the people who mattered most to me. I sent invitations to my parents, Jessica, and about 15 friends from work and college. I bought all of Jessica's favorite foods, set up a playlist with songs my parents loved, and even created a little tour route to show off every room. The party was supposed to start at 2 in the afternoon on a beautiful Saturday. By 2:30, only 4 of my work friends had shown up. My parents called at 3 to say they had forgotten about a prior commitment to help Jessica move some furniture. Jessica did not call at all. She simply posted Instagram photos of herself getting a manicure with the caption, "Self-Care Saturday Vibes," while my carefully prepared party food sat untouched on my new dining room table. My friends tried to cheer me up, telling me that family events were always complicated and that my parents probably just had bad timing. But I knew better. I had seen this pattern my entire life. When Jessica needed anything, the world stopped spinning until her problem was solved. When I needed support, there was always something more important happening. The real slap in the face came the following weekend. Jessica decided to throw a spontaneous birthday party for herself, even though her actual birthday was still 2 months away. She called it a pre-birthday celebration and sent out invitations on Tuesday for a Saturday party. My parents cleared their entire weekend schedule. They showed up early to help decorate, stayed late to clean up, and posted dozens of photos on Facebook about what a wonderful daughter Jessica was and how proud they were of her. I was invited, of course, but as an afterthought. Jessica sent me a text message 2 days before the party, asking if I could bring a salad and maybe help with cleanup. No, please, no thank you. Just an assumption that I would drop everything to support her last-minute party planning, while my own housewarming had been treated like an inconvenience. Sitting in my beautiful new kitchen that Sunday morning, staring at the leftover party supplies from my sparsely attended celebration, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. It was the same feeling I had carried since childhood, the knowledge that no matter how hard I worked or how much I achieved, I would always be secondary in my family's priorities. But I pushed it down like I always did. I told myself that love was not a competition, that my worth was not determined by party attendance, and that I should focus on building my new life rather than dwelling on old disappointments. If only I had known that this was just the beginning of a much deeper betrayal. 6 months into homeownership, I was finally hitting my stride. My mortgage payments were manageable, I had started a small emergency fund, and I was even considering adopting a dog to keep me company in my spacious new home. Life felt stable for the first time in years. Then my father had his heart attack. It happened on a Tuesday morning while he was working in their garden. My mother found him clutching his chest, barely conscious, and called 911. He spent 4 days in the hospital, and while he survived, the medical bills were astronomical. His insurance covered most of the costs, but the follow-up treatments, medications, and the fact that my mother had to take unpaid leave from teaching to care for him created a financial crisis my parents had never experienced. They had always been middle-class comfortable, the kind of people who could afford nice vacations and decent cars, but had never built significant savings. Retirement planning had been more of a vague future concept than a concrete financial strategy. Suddenly, they were drowning in medical debt with reduced income and mounting bills. When my mother called to tell me about their situation, she was crying harder than I had ever heard her cry. They were facing the possibility of losing their house, the place where Jessica and I had grown up, where all their memories lived. The bank was sending letters about missed mortgage payments, and they did not know where to turn. Without hesitation, I invited them to move in with me temporarily while they got back on their feet. I had 3 bedrooms and only needed one. It seemed like the obvious solution, a way for me to finally be the helpful daughter I had always tried to be. The day they moved in, I felt a warmth in my house that had been missing since I bought it. Suddenly, my kitchen was full of my mother's cooking smells. My living room echoed with my father's terrible dad jokes, and I was not coming home to empty silence anymore. We fell into a comfortable routine where I would work during the day while my mother cared for my father, and we would all have dinner together in the evenings. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely close to my parents. They seemed to finally see me as a capable, successful woman, rather than just their responsible but unremarkable older daughter. My father would brag to his friends about my beautiful house and successful career. My mother started asking my opinion about important decisions. I felt valued, needed, appreciated. Those 3 months were some of the happiest of my life. Then Jessica got fired from her job at a boutique marketing firm for what she claimed was office politics. But what I suspected was her chronic lateness and tendency to delegate her work to interns. Around the same time, her boyfriend of 8 months broke up with her via text message after discovering she had been flirting with his best friend on social media. Jessica moved back home, the same weekend arriving at my house with 6 suitcases, 3 boxes of shoes, and a dramatic declaration that her life was completely ruined, and she needed family support to heal from this trauma. I should have seen the warning signs immediately, but I was still basking in the glow of finally having a functional relationship with my parents. The change was immediate and dramatic. Within days of Jessica's arrival, the entire dynamic of my household shifted. My parents stopped asking my opinion about anything and started treating me like the landlord rather than their daughter. Conversations were dominated by Jessica's problems, Jessica's feelings, and Jessica's needs for recovery and support. Jessica, meanwhile, began treating my house like her personal hotel. She took hour-long showers, left dishes in the sink for days, and rearranged my furniture to create better feng shui for healing energy. She hung blackout curtains in my bright, cheerful living room because natural light was too intense for her current emotional state. She moved my carefully curated books to make room for her collection of self-help titles and essential oil diffusers. When I gently suggested that maybe she could be more considerate about shared spaces, my parents immediately jumped to her defense. Jessica was going through a difficult time and needed extra patience and understanding. I was being selfish and unsympathetic to my sister's suffering. The breaking point came when Jessica announced that my master bedroom had better energy than the guest room where she was staying. She wanted to switch rooms with me because the larger space and attached bathroom would be more conducive to her healing process. When I said absolutely not that it was my house and my bedroom, my parents sat me down for what they called a family discussion. They explained that I needed to be more understanding of Jessica's delicate emotional state. Moving to a smaller room temporarily would be a small sacrifice that could make a huge difference in my sister's recovery. Family was about supporting each other through difficult times, and this was my chance to prove that I valued our relationships more than my comfort. I held my ground, but I could see the disappointment in their faces. For the rest of that week, the atmosphere in my house was tense and uncomfortable. My parents barely spoke to me at dinner, and Jessica made passive-aggressive comments about how some people valued material possessions more than family bonds. That was when I should have put my foot down, set clear boundaries, and reminded everyone whose name was on the mortgage. Instead, I kept hoping things would improve, that Jessica would find a new job and move out, that my parents would remember I was the one who had saved them from financial ruin. I was about to learn that hope can be the cruelest emotion of all. The conversation that changed everything happened on a rainy Thursday evening in November. I had just gotten home from a particularly stressful day at work, looking forward to a quiet evening and maybe a glass of wine with dinner. Instead, I found my parents waiting for me in my living room, with the kind of serious expressions that meant trouble. They asked me to sit down because they needed to discuss something important with me. My father looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his hands and avoiding eye contact. My mother seemed determined but sad, like she was about to deliver bad news that she knew would hurt me. What they told me next felt like a physical blow to my chest. Jessica was having severe mental health struggles, they explained. The job loss and breakup had triggered what they believed was clinical depression, and she was having panic attacks almost daily. The guest room in my house was too small and did not have enough natural light, which was making her condition worse. She needed a more spacious, comfortable environment to properly heal and recover. They had been doing research, my mother said, and had learned that environment played a crucial role in mental health recovery. Jessica needed a place where she could spread out, where she could have privacy and peace, where she could focus on getting better without feeling like a burden or a guest. The solution they had come up with was simple. I should move out temporarily and let Jessica have the house while she recovered. I was young and adaptable, they reasoned. I had a steady job and no mental health issues. Finding a temporary apartment would be an inconvenience for me, but it could be life-saving for Jessica. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what they were actually suggesting. They wanted me to give up my house. The house I had worked 5 years to buy, the house I had saved every penny to afford, the house where I had graciously allowed them to live when they had nowhere else to go. They wanted me to move out so that Jessica could move in and treat my home like her personal recovery retreat. When I finally found my voice, I told them absolutely not. This was my house, my sanctuary, my achievement. I had worked myself to exhaustion to afford it. I had given up years of my social life, eaten ramen noodles for months, and sacrificed everything for this place. There was no universe in which I was giving it up, even temporarily, for someone who had never shown me an ounce of respect or gratitude. My father's response was to remind me that family was more important than property. My mother started crying, saying she had raised me better than to prioritize material possessions over my sister's well being. They both insisted that this was a temporary solution just until Jessica got back on her feet and found a new job. But I could see the truth in their eyes. This was not temporary. This was them choosing Jessica again at my expense. This was them deciding that my comfort, my security, and my hard work mattered less than Jessica's convenience. This was the ultimate expression of a lifetime of favoritism and disregard. When I continued to refuse, their disappointment turned to anger. I was being selfish, they said. I was proving that I valued money more than family. A good daughter, a good sister would not hesitate to make the sacrifice. The fact that I was even arguing about it showed them what kind of person I really was. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my beautiful master bedroom, listening to my parents and Jessica planning her redecorating scheme in whispered conversations down the hall. They were discussing paint colors, furniture arrangements, and which of my belongings would need to be moved or stored to make room for Jessica's things. They had already decided. My refusal was just a temporary obstacle to be overcome. The next morning, I told them I needed time to think about it. What I actually needed was time to plan. I had spent my entire life being the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who sacrificed her own needs for the family's convenience. I had swallowed every slight, overlooked every instance of favoritism, and convinced myself that love meant being endlessly giving and forgiving. But this was different. This was not about borrowing money or missing a party or getting less attention. This was about my home, my security, my future. This was about people I had helped, demanding that I sacrifice the most important achievement of my life for someone who had never sacrificed anything for anyone. I was done being the family doormat. It was time for them to learn that actions have consequences and that my kindness had limits. The plan I came up with was simple, legal, and absolutely devastating. I spent the next week quietly putting pieces in place while maintaining the appearance of someone who was reluctantly considering their request. I told my parents I was looking at apartments, which was technically true. I was looking at apartments, just not for the reason they thought. First, I met with a lawyer to understand my rights as a homeowner. The consultation confirmed what I already knew, but needed to hear officially. Since my parents were not on the lease or mortgage, they were essentially house guests with no legal rights to the property. I could ask them to leave at any time with appropriate notice. Next, I opened a new bank account at a different institution and began transferring money out of my joint accounts. My parents had helped me set up these accounts when I was younger, and while they had never abused the access, I was not taking any chances with people who thought they could manipulate me into giving up my house. I researched rental properties and found a nice one-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes from my house. It was smaller than what I was used to, but it was clean, safe, and available immediately. I put down a deposit and arranged to move in the following weekend. Most importantly, I documented everything. I saved text messages, recorded phone conversations where it was legal to do so, and kept a detailed journal of every conversation and demand. I knew that when I implemented my plan, my family would try to rewrite history and paint me as the villain. On Friday afternoon, I told my parents that I had found an apartment and would be moving out on Sunday. They were relieved and grateful, thanking me for doing the right thing and promising that Jessica would take excellent care of the house while she recovered. Jessica herself seemed to think this was always the inevitable outcome, already making lists of changes she wanted to make to optimize the space for healing. That weekend, I moved my personal belongings, clothes, and sentimental items to my new apartment. I left all the furniture, appliances, and household items in the house. When my parents asked about it, I told them it would be easier for everyone if Jessica did not have to worry about furnishing an empty house during her recovery period. They thought I was being generous. In reality, I was being strategic. Sunday evening, after I had finished moving my personal items, I sat down at my kitchen table one last time and wrote 3 letters. One for my parents, one for Jessica, and one for myself, to read whenever I doubted what I was about to do. Monday morning, I called my office and took a personal day. Then I drove to the courthouse and filed formal eviction notices for all 3 of my house guests. Since they had been living in my house for more than 30 days without paying rent, they qualified as tenants under state law and were entitled to 30 days' notice before being required to vacate the premises. The notices were delivered by certified mail on Tuesday afternoon. The phone calls started within an hour. My mother called first crying and confused, asking if there had been some kind of mistake. Then my father called angry and demanding to know what I thought I was doing. Finally, Jessica called screaming that I was ruining her life and destroying her mental health recovery. I had prepared for this moment, practiced my response until it felt natural and calm. I told them that they had made their choice when they decided I should give up my house. They had made it clear that Jessica's comfort was more important than my security, that her needs mattered more than my achievements, and that my sacrifices were expected rather than appreciated. They had 30 days to find alternative housing arrangements. I would not be changing my mind, negotiating the timeline, or accepting any of the guilt they were trying to place on me. Then I hung up and turned off my phone. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of angry voicemails, guilt-inducing text messages, and attempts by extended family members to intervene on my parents' behalf. Everyone had an opinion about what a terrible daughter I was being, how family was supposed to forgive and support each other, and how I was destroying relationships over pride and stubbornness. But something interesting happened during those 30 days. As the reality of their situation set in the true character of my family members began to show. Jessica, faced with the prospect of having to find her own housing and support herself financially, completely fell apart. She accused me of causing her mental breakdown, threatened to sue me for emotional damages, and demanded that other family members pressure me into changing my mind. When none of those tactics worked, she simply disappeared. 1 week before the eviction deadline, Jessica packed her belongings and moved in with a friend across town, leaving my parents to deal with the situation alone. She did not help them pack, did not assist with their housing search, and did not offer any of the emotional support they had sacrificed so much to provide her. My parents, suddenly abandoned by the daughter they had chosen over me, were forced to confront the reality of their financial situation and their relationship with both their children. They found a small senior living apartment that fit their budget, but the contrast between their new cramped quarters and the spacious house they had been forced to leave was stark. The irony was not lost on me. Jessica, the daughter who had supposedly needed my house for her mental health recovery, had recovered just fine once she realized she would actually have to take responsibility for her own living situation. Meanwhile, my parents, who had been so concerned about family loyalty and supporting each other through difficult times, had been abandoned by the very person they had chosen to support. As for me, I was discovering what it felt like to live without the constant stress of managing other people's emotions and expectations. My small apartment was peaceful in a way my house had never been during those final months. I could come home from work without wondering what drama would be waiting for me. I could make decisions about my space, my time, and my life without considering how it would affect 3 other people who seemed to view my existence as a resource to be managed rather than a life to be respected. The quiet was jarring at first. I had become so accustomed to chaos that peace felt almost uncomfortable. But gradually, I began to remember who I was outside of my role as the responsible daughter, the reliable sister, the person who could always be counted on to sacrifice her own needs for the greater good. 3 months after the eviction, I was surprised to receive a phone call from Jessica. She had been living with her friend, but that arrangement had fallen through after what she described as personality conflicts. But what I suspected were the same entitlement issues that had plagued our family relationships. She wanted to meet for coffee to clear the air and discuss our relationship moving forward. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The Jessica who met me at the coffee shop was different from the dramatic, demanding person who had taken over my house. She looked tired, older somehow, and her usual confident swagger had been replaced by something that might have been humility. She started by apologizing, which was not something I had ever heard her do sincerely. She admitted that she had taken advantage of my generosity and had not considered how her behavior might have affected me. The job loss and breakup had sent her into a panic, and she'd fallen back on old family patterns, where other people solved her problems while she focused on her feelings. Living on her own for the first time in her adult life had been a wake-up call, she said. She had been forced to confront her own tendency to expect rescue rather than taking responsibility for her own life. She had started therapy not for depression, but for what her therapist called learned helplessness and dysfunctional family dynamics. I listened to her apology with cautious optimism, but I was not ready to simply forgive and forget. I told her that I appreciated her newfound insight, but that rebuilding our relationship would require consistent actions, not just words. She would need to demonstrate that she had actually changed, not just say that she had learned a lesson. My parents took longer to come around. For months, they maintained that I had overreacted, that family problems should be solved within the family, and that involving lawyers and eviction notices was unnecessarily cruel. They continued to view themselves as victims of my unreasonable behavior rather than people who had made unreasonable demands. The turning point came when my father had another smaller heart episode and needed emergency care. I was the one who got the call from the hospital, the one who made medical decisions when my mother was too panicked to think clearly, and the one who handled the insurance paperwork and follow up care arrangements. Jessica, despite living in the same city, was nowhere to be found during the crisis. She claimed she was too emotionally fragile to handle hospital environments and family stress. Sitting in that hospital waiting room, watching my mother realize that her good daughter was not there when she was needed most, while her selfish daughter had dropped everything to help, something shifted in our family dynamic. My mother finally admitted that perhaps they had not treated me fairly over the years. She acknowledged that I had always been the one they turned to when things got serious, the one who could be trusted to handle responsibility and show up when needed. She began to see that their favoritism toward Jessica had not actually helped Jessica become a capable, reliable adult. My father, medicated and contemplative during his recovery, had time to think about patterns he had never examined before. He realized that his tendency to protect Jessica from consequences had prevented her from developing resilience and problem solving skills. Meanwhile, his assumption that I could handle anything had led him to take my strength and reliability for granted. The conversations that followed were not easy. There were tears, arguments, and moments when I wondered if it would be simpler to just maintain distance rather than work through decades of accumulated resentment and hurt. But gradually, slowly, we began to build something new. My parents started asking my opinion instead of assuming I would comply with their decisions. They began to acknowledge my achievements and thank me for my help, rather than treating my support as expected and automatic. When Jessica needed assistance, they encouraged her to solve her own problems first, rather than immediately offering rescue. Jessica, for her part, began the long process of learning to function as an independent adult. She found a new job, secured her own apartment, and started paying her own bills without family assistance. She stopped expecting other people to manage her emotions and began taking responsibility for her own mental health. Our family dinners, when they happened, became more balanced. Conversations included everyone rather than revolving around Jessica's latest crisis. My parents learned to show interest in my life and career rather than treating them as stable background elements that required no attention. It was not perfect. Old patterns do not disappear overnight, and there were still moments when I felt taken for granted or when Jessica slipped back into expecting special treatment. But the foundation had shifted. I was no longer willing to sacrifice my well-being for family peace, and they had learned that my kindness was not unlimited. The most important change was in how I viewed myself. I had spent my entire adult life defining my worth through my usefulness to other people, measuring my value by how much I could give and how little I needed to receive in return. Learning to set boundaries, to say no without guilt, and to prioritize my own needs had been terrifying at first. I had been afraid that people would stop loving me if I stopped being endlessly available and accommodating. Instead, I discovered that the people worth having in my life respected me more when I respected myself. My new apartment became a sanctuary where I could exist without constantly managing other people's emotions or solving other people's problems. I started dating again, something I had put on hold during my house saving years and the family crisis that followed. I met Brian, an architect who appreciated my independence and did not expect me to shrink myself to make him feel more important. I learned what it felt like to be valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide. I discovered that healthy relationships involve mutual support, rather than one-sided sacrifice. I realized that love should feel like safety and encouragement, not like walking on eggshells while managing other people's expectations. The house that had started this entire conflict became a symbol of my transformation. 6 months after the eviction, I decided to sell it. The building itself held too many complicated memories, and I realized that my attachment to it had been more about proving my worth than about creating a home. I used the profit to buy a smaller but more beautiful house in a neighborhood I loved, close enough to my parents for regular visits, but far enough away to maintain healthy boundaries. Jessica helped me move, which was the first time she had ever offered to help me with anything without being asked. The family relationships I rebuilt were not the same as what we had before, but they were better. They were based on choice rather than obligation, respect rather than assumption, and mutual care rather than one-sided sacrifice. I learned that you cannot build healthy relationships on the foundation of unhealthy patterns, no matter how much love exists underneath the dysfunction. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in dynamics that hurt everyone involved. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who test that love the hardest. But here is what I learned through this painful experience: true family is not always the one you are born into. Sometimes it is the one you choose, the one that chooses you back, and the one that sees your worth even when you cannot see it yourself. Setting boundaries is not cruel, it is necessary for healthy relationships. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting or accepting continued mistreatment. It means choosing peace over resentment while maintaining the wisdom to protect yourself from future harm. Most importantly, your value as a person is not determined by how much you can give or how little you need to receive. You deserve relationships where your love is appreciated rather than exploited, where your needs matter as much as everyone else's, and where your sacrifices are honored rather than expected. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your own well being? Let me know in the comments below, and do not forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real life stories about family drama, personal growth, and learning to stand up for yourself. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they deserve better than being taken for granted. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the hardest battles are with the people we love the most, but fighting for your own worth is always worth it. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video.